It's very late on the East Coast. The Oilers got burned in overtime. Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your interim host, Nick Zararis. If you are watching on YouTube, you heard me tempt the gods on the show yesterday. I said, if the Kings are going to make this a series, they're going to have to win some games in overtime. We're recording within 5 minutes of Anze Kopitar's overtime game winner. But before we get into today's episode, gotta remind everybody, today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a hyper-competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go. The mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends, download Monopoly Go. It is free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. So to set the table for you on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to touch mostly on the game itself. We'll extrapolate outwards a little bit, some of the plot lines, some of the themes that are starting to develop through two games, and we'll go from there. First segment, we're going to touch on the game itself, the energy, the feeling, some of the points we had highlighted on yesterday's show that did end up carrying over to game number two. Then we're going to touch on some of the things that were different in game number two, because this game did have a very different feel, both stylistically, both in terms of outcome, obviously, stylistically, very clear. And just the energy in the game, the players within the game, there was a little bit more juice to it than it had in game number one because of the way game number one unfolded. And then we're going to wrap up with we're going to highlight some good performances and then some guys you would like a little bit more from. So starting off, Rip, anytime you go to overtime, anything can happen. That's the most basic principle you have to accept. And the Oilers were at one point down in this game 2-0. They scored to get it to 2-1, and then Drew Doughty scored to get it to 3-1. And the Oilers battled back from 3-1 to get it to 4-4 to go to overtime. That's nothing to sneeze at. That is a pretty impressive performance against a staunch defensive team. As much as people like to make fun of the goaltending situation for the Kings in regards to Cam Talbot, maybe the Kings' lack thereof of interest in trying to score the puck as opposed to clog up the middle of the ice and force you to shoot into their shins, which the Oilers did the Oilers were not as disciplined in how they executed in this game. And ultimately, that was the difference. And I know I said we're going to talk about the differences in the second segment, so I'm going to put a pin in that for the moment, and we'll open it up to just this game had a very interesting feel. You heard me talk about it on the show yesterday. I had said, if you are going to the game, if things happen weirdly in the game, if the Kings get out in front early, if there's a big hit, if there's a penalty kill, you got to do what you can to keep the crowd in the game. And the Oilers had a couple of nice penalty kills. The crowd really got back into it once Brett Kulak of all people scored that goal. That was really helpful. It stemmed the tide, and you have to think about all of these big moments within a game as both, and this is going to sound stupid. This is going to sound like it doesn't make sense. They are both standalone entities, but they are also part of a common thread. You look at how a lot of the goals within this game develop, where the scoring chance originated from, where the sequence, I should say, originated from, how the puck got to where it went, and then how the puck ended up in the back of the net. One of the things that really jumped out to me in the first 5-10 minutes of this game, and this is something I had talked about on yesterday's show too. I talked about it in regards to the Maple Leafs and the Bruins in their game number 2. I talked about it in regards to the Capitals in their game number 2 against the Rangers. When you are down 1-0 in a playoff series, you are going to come out with a little more oomph in your step. You are going to come out and really try to set the tone early in the game that we know we lost. It's not acceptable to lose again. Even if you're down 2-0, the old cliche about a series doesn't start till someone loses a home game, that all of that I do genuinely feel teams can come back from 2-0 down. That's not that hard, especially in hockey where weird things happen. But for the purposes of this conversation, and I know I say for the purposes of this conversation a lot on the show, but it's my favorite segue to get back on topic. The Oilers are in a position now at 1-1 where you would say they thoroughly dominated game number 1. You would say they came out of the gate a little bit slow in game number 2. They made a few mistakes. A lot of their mistakes tonight ended up in the back of their net. You would really like that Drew Doughty goal back. That goal can't happen. Just in terms of the transition mistake that leads to Drew Doughty getting a breakaway. And then Stuart Skinner's got to have that one. I hate to be the goalie's got to have that one guy. I generally err on the side of goalies because I feel they're underdefended and underprotected amongst the community because it's the only position in all of sports where perfection is the expectation. If you've ever been to the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto, that's the quote that's on the wall above the goaltending exhibit, and it's the God's honest truth. You could say the same thing about maybe a kicker in American style football, but it doesn't have quite the same level of impact. Where if your goalie stinks, you're going to have a hard time. I didn't think Skinner was bad, but the play in front of him did not do him any favors. I felt both teams, the Kings and the Oilers, as the game went along, there was a lot more space. There was a lot more opportunities. And part of that, and you heard me talking about it right before, the idea that the Kings came out with a little bit more jump in their step. They were a little bit more aggressive, and they really wanted to get in this game. And in this game, in a sense that they're not going to just be here for the Oilers to run up the score on, that they are going to make plays. They're going to find a way to be competitive. And the Kings did a reasonable job. I know I wrote down in my notes, and yes, if you didn't watch the live show, I did right after the game ended on Monday night. I am still one of the old heads who takes handwritten notes when they're covering a live event. Let's see if the camera there we go. Yeah, you can see my chicken scratch handwriting, but I am still old school. I do have my handwritten notes. One thing I wrote down in my notes for the first period of this game is that the Kings did a really good job of blocking shots and forcing the Oilers to get uncomfortable. And that's your goal as an underdog, especially on the road. A lot gets made of what does a good road playoff game look like? And the Kings executed it to a T. They got the crowd out of it early. They forced the other team to chase the entire game. And then they stole one. You go back and watch the sequence that leads up to the Kopitar goal to win the game in overtime. That shouldn't happen. A lot of the plays in this game for both teams, I would say several of the Oilers goals, the first Dylan Holloway goal, okay, sure. The second one, Cam Talbot's got to have. I know Cam Talbot is not a world beater. He is a slightly above average starter, and I know it hits off of Trevor. I think it was Trevor Moore. It might have been Matt Roy. I'm not positive which player's stick it hit. I can't remember off the top of my head. Wait, I wrote it down. Tip LAK 44 on the Kings. I think that's Mikey Anderson. Yes, that is Mikey Anderson. This is why we take notes. That way we can refer back to things. But I didn't feel the Oilers played terrible. I felt the Oilers were very loose. I felt they did not hold up to the Kings' pressure, both in forechecking, and so when the Kings were forced to play defense, and then when the Oilers were in the offensive zone, the Kings did a really good job as soon as the Oilers entered the offensive zone with possession of swarming the puck carrier and forcing that puck carrier to make that decision quicker than they wanted to. The eternal decision: do I pass this puck or do I keep this puck moving? When you force players to hurry it up, even if it's only slightly, even if they do get the pass off, it's off by ever so slightly. I can think off the top of my head of at least 3 times the Oilers gained the zone with speed where Sidle was the puck carrier. He had a little bit of room going to the middle, and he tried to force that pass across the middle. The Kings stepped up, and they went the other way. That was the story of this game. Both teams' ability in transition to counterattack, to spring guys, to make something happen off of the rush to put the other team at a disadvantage. And the Oilers just were not good enough in transition to win this game. But coming up next, we're going to talk about some of the things that were different in this game as opposed to game number one stylistically and maybe energy-wise. Coming up next on Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every single day. I've been told I'm a pretty competitive person. I was thrown out of gym class multiple times in middle school for being a bad teammate. My competitive side's a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, where you play not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. The best part? Messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly. But now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself, and the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. Get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make that switch today to Locked On Sports Today. Free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you are listening to this on your Thursday morning commute to school, to work, to the gym, or wherever you might be, thanks for hanging out. I said this the other day doing the late night episode because it puts in context just how late it is on the East Coast as I'm recording this. By the time this goes up, there will be people who are getting up to go to work who will be unlocking their phone and seeing there's a new episode on the feed. I know that feeling when you first get up in the morning and you want nothing more than to go back to sleep. So you have to go to whatever it is, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a playlist, whatever. If this is starting your day, thank you very much for making this your first listen of the day. What was different in this game? Number one, the Oilers were not able to be comfortable. In game number one, the Oilers were able to get their multiple power plays. They were able to get Zach Hyman humming. I thought Zach Hyman had a good game tonight. I know he had the one goal, but when you're coming off a game where you had a hat trick, one goal feels like kind of a letdown, but he was noticeable. He was impactful. Threw a couple big hits. He made a point. He blew up Philip Deneau on that one hit later in the game. I believe that was late in the third period, if I remember correctly. The Oilers were in this game, but they were not comfortable. The Kings did a really good job, like I had mentioned before at the end of the last segment of the episode. When the Oilers would gain the zone with speed, it wasn't just when Sidle would do it. It was the same thing with when McDavid would gain the zone, but as the game got along, McDavid kind of figured out how he needed to approach the zone entry, and they were able to create offense off of that. But you go down the lineup, I felt Dylan Holloway's line had a decent enough performance other than his goals. And weirdly enough, I felt the Evander Kane and Corey Perry line had a really effective game because they were the one line that kind of understood, oh, this is a transition up and down game. We should try and slow this down and just get some zone time. I don't think the Oilers did as good of a job in this game as they did in game number one of really working the cycle and trying to force the Kings into mistakes the hard way. When you play game one, it goes as well as it does, doing what you want to do. Let's not forget, in an ideal world, the Oilers are going to live and die by the rush. They're going to get all of those opportunities where they're going to get the 3-on-2s and 2-on-1s. With the best players in the world here. You know, when you have the opportunity to get those rush chances to gain the zone with speed, you know, that's why the Oilers love the regroup, where the defensemen will gather the puck behind the net. They'll skate out leisurely to the circles, and they will leave the puck, and Connor McDavid will make a big loop. He will hit a full head of steam, and he will be close to, if not over 20 miles an hour by the time he reaches the other team's blue line, because he got 50 to 60 feet of ice to build up speed. And at that point, you're not catching him, because once he's got his feet churning, he's the fastest human I've ever seen. Word to Seth Rogen in Superbad. The thing that didn't work tonight, and it feels a little unfair to make this critique, it felt like the Oilers were just kind of waiting around for McDavid or Draisaitl to make something happen. And I know that sounds weird to say in a game where you had goals from Brett Kulak and Dylan Holloway twice, and then, Zach Hyman, who the Zach Hyman goal only happens because McDavid and Draisaitl's passing on that power play. Gross. Just absolutely unfair that they're able to do what they do. But at 5-on-5, I thought Draisaitl took a little while to get going. They had talked about that on the broadcast. I was subjected to the American broadcast on TBS where Colby Armstrong was kind of trying to riff and trying to be funny, but he had mentioned more than once during the broadcast that Draisaitl didn't have a shot on goal in the first period, if I remember correctly. And then as the game went along, I think he had 8 scoring chances, like 5 or 6 shots on goal. Draisaitl ended up being relatively impactful in this game. But, and part of the argument for separating McDavid and Draisaitl is that way they don't have to do too much on their own. And McDavid had himself he was McDavid. He got an assist. He was noticeable. He was impactful. He threw the one big hit in the neutral zone that got highlighted. I believe that was on Trevor Moore that the broadcast showed a second time. He did take the bad penalty on Pierre-Luc Dubois. I'm not going to critique Connor McDavid. He has earned enough leeway with his existence that if he takes a bad penalty from time to time, or he doesn't have a multi-point game, it's not the end of the world. He's the best hockey player in the world. But as far as things I would have liked to have seen in this game from the Oilers that I didn't, and things that worked for them in game one that they didn't, they did not find a way. They did not find a way to really make the Kings actively play defense. You heard me talk about before that Kane and Corey Perry did a good job of trying to slow the game down, cycle it out, and it's twofold here. Number one, if you slow the game down and you're cycling in the offensive zone, if you're cycling in the Kings zone, you're making the Kings play defense. You are tiring out their forwards. You are tiring out their defensemen. You are increasing the chances of them making a mistake, which can increase the quality of your scoring chance or them taking a penalty. In a game like this, that's frantic, that's up and down, you need at some point one of your lines to take the initiative to try and bring the temperature of the game down and take pressure off of your defense. I thought the Oilers got themselves into trouble tonight because their defensemen were aggressive pinching in the offensive zone, trying to maintain the offensive zone and creating odd man rushes for the Kings when the game did not need that. The Oilers, this is a game that if the Oilers put their heads down, they really work that cycle, and then in the McDavid or Draisaitl shifts, those guys go out there and try and do what they do. I think the Oilers probably would have fared a little bit better in this game. And look, you're not going to win every game. Just speaking matter-of-factly, the Kings are a talented hockey team. We talked about that a lot during the lead-up to the series. You saw Adrian Kempe have himself a really nice game tonight. He's frankly an underrated player league-wide. Fiala, who's had 40 goals a couple times, he had a tuck. And then Kopitar, timeless wonder. He must have heard me talking about him, saying he's only really going to focus on one end of the ice because he just doesn't have the energy for both. Kopitar, good as ever. I thought the Oilers were doing a nice job of trying to get favorable matchups when they could, using last shade. It's different now. Now you're going to LA 1-1. The Kings stole one on the road. You gotta win one in LA now. If you were going to win this series, you have to win a game in LA. That's not undoable. That's not impossible. But the Oilers are going to need to be a little bit crisper. They are going to need to be a little bit cleaner. And we're going to talk about some of the things they can do strategically to make that happen coming up next on Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every single day. When you're drafting your fantasy team, don't you wish you could handpick all the best players for your business team? If you're building out your talent roster, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching assessments and virtual interviews. Keep waiting. Indeed US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. The thing I like about Indeed, everything's all in the same place. You can take certifications, you can take tests, you can look for jobs, and you can schedule interviews through the website. Indeed knows when you're growing your business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applicants that match your must-have requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. You need to hire. You need Indeed. Wrapping up today's edition of Locked On Oilers. It's going to happen. Those types of games happen. The Kings have enough talent. They are strategic enough in their deployment of that talent that if you give them opportunities, they are going to take advantage. Sure, you go and look at the goals. Some of them they're ugly. Just, we're going to come out and say it, The Kempe redirect in air, that's a terrible transition turnover. That shouldn't happen. That Kempe should not have had the opportunity to redirect that puck in midair because the Oilers shouldn't have turned the puck over at the blue line. That's an area that is a direct coaching point that is correctable, and that's not inherently a bad or wrong decision. You always want, and this is my opinion, I know there are some people on the internet who like to think they know better than the actual hockey players, but they see the ice differently from you. When they make that extra pass that makes you want to punch a hole in the wall because they passed out of an open net because the goalie already dove, I understand your frustration. I do. I am a fan. I understand that frustration. But the view is different for them down on the ice. You have to think about it in terms of depth perception, especially if you're watching on TV where it's not as... You don't have an appreciation for the depth of the ice surface left to right and horizontally on TV, where it looks like they have a shooting lane, but they don't really, because somebody's going to be in the way. And the Kings did a really good job of that. I thought, especially in the first period, when the Oilers were a bit disoriented because the Kings got out to a lead, I thought the Oilers did a good job of playing into that panic. When you start putting pressure on the other team, when you get a lead early and you force them to start chasing it, they're going to start to open up. They're going to start to make decisions that they probably don't want to. And that's really the main takeaway I have from this game. And something as far as adjustments-wise, the Oilers are a good team. A fundamentally good team. They have talent. This is one of the most talented Oilers rosters of my lifetime. I would argue, of my conscious memory, this is probably the most talented iteration of the Oilers, period. In my conscious memory as a 27-year-old, this is probably the most talented Oilers team I can recall. But they got behind a little bit early. They are not what I would consider a strong defensive team. They're passable defensively, but once you get behind, you're going to have to start taking more risks. You're going to have Cody Ceci and Evan Bouchard pinching in the offensive zone to try and keep that puck in, to try and create second chances. I don't think the Oilers did a good job tonight of trying to get second, third, fourth scoring opportunities. They would get the zone, they would generate one scoring chance, and then the Kings would be able to spring and go the other way. The path to goals is zone time. The Kings won the shots on goal meter, whatever you want to call it tonight. The Kings have more shots on goal. That was terrible English. I'm tired. It's almost 2 a.m. Leave me alone. The Kings controlled large stretches of play. I thought the Oilers did a reasonable enough job, but the Kings guys are good. I know we tend to look at things through the lens of the team we're rooting for, both in a given game and in a series, but the other team's going to make adjustments too. This is something we touched on yesterday's show, where we talked about it, where it's kind of a cat and mouse game, where the Kings saw what didn't work for them in game number 1, so they made some tweaks. The Oilers saw what worked for them in game number 1, said we're going to keep some of that, and then made some tweaks on top of that to try and counter the adjustments the Kings ended up making. The Kings came out, and it's not that they were suddenly better or a more talented team. It's that they were playing a little more desperate. They were winning 50-50 pucks. I think I tweeted during the game, or I wrote it in my notes. I don't know. It's all blurring together at this point. I'm tired. I wrote down in my notes that it felt like the Kings were winning every single 50-50 puck, and that's called anecdotal evidence. That is not authoritative. I was not tracking the puck battles one by one. I should do that at some point these playoffs, just for a segment for the show, because I think you guys would find it pretty interesting. But when you're in that boat where you're down a goal, you're down 2 goals, you got to start to stem the flow. And the Oilers did that. They got the Kulak goal, and that's fine. That's great. But you want to have your offense playing in a way that is replicable over an extended period of time. Generally speaking, the teams that make something special happen, those are the teams that are able to adapt to the game as it goes along, even if they're uncomfortable, even if the other team is actively playing well. And I'll wrap up today's show on this note. The Kings were always going to win a game or two in this series, at least 1 or 2. You heard me talk about it during the lead up to the series. You heard me talk about it on the show yesterday. The Kings were going to win a game or 2. They have enough individual talent where they're going to be able to find ways. I didn't expect them to win game 2 in overtime. I expected probably one of the games in LA, 3 or 4. But math-wise, okay. They have played 2 games in this series. It is 1-1. It is now best of 5. You need to win 3 of the next 5 games to advance to the next round, where you have a date with the Canucks or you have a date with the Predators. How do you get there? You need to win 3 of the next 5. You probably don't want to go to overtime again, just in case, because you go and look at the lead up to the Kopitar goal and you feel kind of stinky about it because the Oilers just frankly didn't make a good play in that sequence. And when you get guys like Kopitar who are good and give them open looks on the net, they're going to score. I want to say the Oilers played a C+ game and they still got to overtime. The Oilers do play on Friday night. I should say tomorrow at this point because it is 2 a.m. on Thursday morning, but I am very tired. I'm very upset the Oilers lost. I'm very upset I had to do an Oilers instant reaction right after they lost. I hope you have a great Thursday. I hope the Oilers did not ruin your sleep schedule. And to wrap up today's show, just please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you are watching over on YouTube, you can see the bags in my eyes and how tired I am. I'm very excited to go to bed in probably about 30 to 40 minutes when I'm done editing this. Subscribe, like the video, leave a comment. Let me know what you didn't like about the Oilers' performance tonight. I will be on Locked On NHL Power Rankings with Hunter Hodes later today. I'll talk to you guys then.